During your working years, you have almost no control over your taxable income. You basically just have to report whatever your employer earns for most people. In retirement, however, you have a lot of control on when and where your income comes from. Unfortunately, many retirees are following a withdrawal strategy that feels smart, but actually triggers a tax bomb later in life. And I'm going to show you a case study where this makes up to $1 million of difference in their ending assets. For a lot of you, this is going to be tens of thousands in extra taxes if you go about this the wrong way. So I'm going to discuss this retirement tax trap with you today and walk you through a 5-step process to make sure you're creating the best retirement withdrawal strategy for your situation. Unfortunately, there is no one size fits all. Now, my name is Scott Caulfield. I'm a CPA and CFA Charterholder and the founder of Sophos Wealth Management. Let's start by looking at the default withdrawal strategy and why it fails for some people. Most people go about spending their taxable accounts first. Second, they'll take from their tax deferred accounts, think about like an IRA, traditional 401k, and they leave their Roth accounts last. On the surface, this seems pretty logical. Your taxable brokerage account is kind of the leaky bucket. You're paying taxes on dividends and interest each year. You have to pay capital gains taxes along the way as you're selling things off to fund your lifestyle. You may not even be receiving Social Security, pension, and other income yet, especially if you retire early. So you might be paying nothing in taxes or much, much less than you're used to. And after a lifetime of paying taxes on your income, it feels pretty great to go to a lower tax rate. Additionally, it's going to really help with Medicare premiums. If you're already retired, your income-related monthly adjustment amount, that Medicare surcharge, is going to be much lower than if you were pulling in more income now. If you retire early and you're on Affordable Care Act, say public marketplace insurance, you might be receiving a subsidy if you're in a low taxable income bracket. So lots of reasons why on the surface, this looks pretty attractive. Here's the problem with the logic. If you go this way, you are allowing your IRA to grow untouched, and required minimum distributions, when they kick in, they're going to push you into forced income, much higher marginal tax rates in the future, more of your Social Security being taxable, potentially much higher income-related monthly adjustment amount, IRMAA, those Medicare premiums, and in some cases, unnecessarily high capital gains tax rates in the future. Let me just show you a quick example of this tax bomb. This comes from a recent video I did on a 55-year-old doctor with about $5 million. So what you can see here from this chart, this is mapping out where his income tax brackets are going to be over time. In this plan, he's going to retire just after 55, retire young, and he's going to be, for him, at a pretty low tax bracket. That's that green line down here, 12% bracket. When he starts taking Social Security, he'll bump up. So then he'll be getting close to the 22% tax bracket. But you can see what happens when his RMDs kick in. He shoots up, shoots way past the 24% tax bracket, and pays massive amounts of taxes later in life. So in his case, having this nice, attractive tax rate the next decade ends up costing him tons later in life. By saving taxes now, if he follows that default strategy, he would pay a lot more later on. Usually, we are trying to smooth out your tax rate over time. We want to ensure you're paying the least amount of taxes over your lifetime. We want to maximize the growth of your assets or maximize the amount you can spend in retirement. So how do we actually go about doing that? I'm going to show you a 5-step strategy you can follow to help determine the optimal order of withdrawals for your situation. The first step is pretty simple. You just need to identify your spending needs. If you don't know how much you're spending each month or year, it's hard to say that if you even can retire, right? So we got to know how much you actually need to spend. And this is also the time to consider, what are your lifestyle and financial goals? Are you going to budget for higher spending in the first part of your retirement, the so-called go-go years, potentially do some travel and other things you've been waiting on? Is your goal to maybe leave a legacy for charities or heirs, beneficiaries? This is the chance to kind of map that out so we can take it into account on the next steps. For step 2, we want to map out your known guaranteed or fixed income. So either in a spreadsheet, or much easier if you have financial planning software, you're mapping out these known sources of income. So put down the timing and amounts for your Social Security. I usually default to full retirement age, 67 for most people, unless clients specifically tell me otherwise. And then we play with it later in their plan to see how either claiming early or delaying can change things. This is our chance to put down RMDs, pension income, if applicable, rental income, if applicable, annuities, anything else that might kick in there. We now go to step 3 and identify the funding gap. How much you need to withdraw from your investable accounts to fund that gap between those guaranteed sources of income, and your spending needs. Now, this gap can be variable, right? Because things like Social Security can have flexible timing/amounts. You might be spending more early in retirement, maybe less in the middle, maybe budgeting more at the end of retirement for potential healthcare costs. So we want to map out this gap so we know what that plug figure, those withdrawals each year, needs to be. Then we want to look at your actual investable account blends. What is your mix of taxable, tax deferred, and Roth accounts? So, in thinking about these, we want to keep in mind for those taxable accounts, that leaky bucket we mentioned, on withdrawals, you don't actually have to pay any tax on the withdrawals. Although if you're having to sell investments to fund those withdrawals, you may need to be paying capital gains tax on that, somewhere between 0, 15, 18.8, or 23.8. Now, your tax deferred accounts, if you're withdrawing from an IRA, for instance, you're going to have to pay ordinary income tax on that withdrawal. Roth account, that's the shining account in retirement, you're not going to have to pay any taxes on withdrawals. For the growth of your taxable account, you're having to pay capital gains tax on some of it and ordinary income tax on some of it. Interest, you're paying ordinary income tax on. Non-qualified dividends, paying ordinary income tax on. Qualified dividends and those sales, you're paying capital gains tax on. Tax deferred account, again, you're not having to pay anything on the growth. Roth, once again, nothing on the growth. And then keeping in mind the forced income each account is going to give you. For those taxable accounts, you're going to have those dividends each year, interest each year, most likely. And for some people, mutual fund distributions. Those tax deferred accounts, you've got those RMDs in the future, and those Roth accounts. Fortunately, under today's law, nothing. So then we go to step 5, the big one, mapping out your income or withdrawals and your tax brackets. So you should be able to kind of map out some different withdrawal strategies now to see how they're going to impact your taxable income each year. On this step, you're usually trying to manage your withdrawals intentionally. You want to fill up your low tax brackets. You want to avoid unnecessary bracket jumps, avoid, peaks and valleys to the extent that you can. Make sure you're taking into account Social Security taxation, Medicare surcharges, future RMDs, and then you want to explore tax planning opportunities, Roth conversions, capital gains harvesting. You're looking again at those peaks and valleys. Are there opportunities? It's really common to see really low tax brackets the first few years of retirement, much higher tax brackets later on. So this is really your tax planning opportunity. A lot of advisors talk about a golden window between, say, age 60 and 70. That's when you have the most flexibility, the least, say, forced income, where you can really make a big difference in your situation. So now let's go back to the doctor and look at just how big a difference doing some Roth conversions in his early retirement can make. So first example here, if he was to do Roth conversions up to the 22% tax bracket, he would end with nearly $1 million more in ending assets. You can see this green area here right underneath the 22% tax bracket. If he fills that up, it's voluntarily paying more in taxes the first decade of retirement, but it vastly reduces those future taxes he'll have to pay. It's going to make a massive difference to his assets over time. If he goes one step further and fills up the 24% tax bracket, you can see he is going to pay a lot more in taxes. His taxable income is going to be much higher early in retirement. However, that projects him to end with almost over 1.3 million more in ending assets than if he was to do no Roth conversions. So that makes a huge difference. But I will give a caveat here. Sometimes you see these results and you go, oh man, I just want to optimize for the biggest number possible. But these are unknowns. We don't know what future tax rates are going to be. We don't know if they might do future RMDs on Roth accounts. That was actually once upon a time a proposal for high net worth individuals that we're going to have to do RMDs on Roths regardless of age even. So that's something to kind of keep in mind, that the future tax code is written in pencil. It's not written in stone, but you can see there are massive opportunities. So hopefully you can start following these steps, map out your future situation so that you're being intentional about doing the best thing for your situation. A lot of people, that does mean doing tax planning, Roth conversions, realizing capital gains. For others, that may not actually make sense. You need to actually map out your unique situation. I see big differences from client to client. So there's no way to say what's going to be optimal for everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. Appreciate if you liked the video, subscribe to my channel, and share with anyone you think would benefit. Thanks.